About 2 years ago, it was announced in Australia that the NBN rollout would begin, and with that, the existing copper-based services, including PSTN, would be gradually switched off. NBN Co has been issuing notices via mail to everyone, including monitoring centres, who specifically will be impacted by the changeover. So in today's podcast, we have Luke Kavanagh and Mark Hatton from Suretek, and we're going to be discussing how the NBN rollout has and will impact the business of alarm monitoring. So firstly, Mark, as you're handling this on a day-to-day basis, are you finding the monitoring centres are responding to the NBN notification letter or not? And have any left it too late? And if so, how have they been affected?
We've had a varied experience with that. I had one customer in Victoria where he essentially ignored the letter, and he had come to us one afternoon when his services had been terminated on the date that he'd been advised. He had then contacted NBN and Telstra and managed to have that service temporarily reconnected, but then rang us and said, hey, what am I going to do? What are my options from here on? And it was literally people scrambling to come up with a solution for him, where he had literally left it to the last moment. And I believe that they extended that disconnection by a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, but ultimately it was cut off and stayed off.
Right.
So there was really no comeback at that stage.
So they need to take the notification of service letters seriously then?
Absolutely. This particular company literally said, I'm sure they won't, because we're a security company. We're monitoring high-profile customers in potentially emergency situations. They couldn't possibly cut that off, and yet they did.
Right.
And of course, the legislation supports NBN Co in doing exactly that.
How did that impact his business?
Well, literally, they were off the air, could not receive any incoming alarm traffic to their centre. So the impact to the business basically was fairly dramatic. Just in simple terms, in an afternoon, he missed a large number of closings. So he's left with that exact problem where he needs to then make phone calls on his 1 or 2 mobile phones sitting in the control room, calling these customers to confirm whether they had closed or they hadn't closed. And that led to more questions from the customers. Well, why don't you know whether I've closed?
Yeah, probably not exactly the kind of customer feedback you want to be receiving as a monitoring centre. That's probably a good way to go broke. But on the back of that, what is your advice to monitoring centres that are receiving or have received the notification letters from NBN?
Well, they certainly should be addressing the situation immediately. They shouldn't be hesitating at all. They should be investigating their options. A typical time frame of in a year's time or in 6 months' time or in 18 months' time, if that date seems to be a long way away, that's led to these letters just being shelved. They're sitting in an in tray. They're not being reacted to until they attend a meeting or they speak to someone else in the industry that's having bad experience. Oh, yeah, that affects me. We need to investigate that. And probably their primary problem at the moment is they're not quite sure who it is that they should speak to.
In the beginning, Simon, there was a lot of hysteria about the alarm system itself, like the monitored premises, and about how that was going to communicate across NBN. But there was zero talk about how the control room is going to manage this migration to NBN. And from our discussions with telcos to date, they themselves haven't really tested, and nor do they really have the resources to test a real-world environment replicating a control room.
So how are the monitoring centres reacting to the letter, though? I guess what I'm asking is, what's the typical course of action that people are taking?
Everyone's going to react different. Some just have that head under the rock type of approach, and others will be proactive. But even the proactive ones, they're going to go to the telcos and ask questions that the telcos don't really have the answers for. And I think that's where the telcos are having to rely on specialists like ourselves with experience in this space and the resources to test this technology in a real-world environment. That seems to be the only way forward in order to produce a workable solution moving forward. One that you can say, hey, if we install this link with this attached hardware, this has been proven to answer 99% of alarm events. At the moment, there is basically zero lab testing or even real-world testing, and that seems to be like a major issue.
Right. Okay, so with that in mind, my next question then is the NBN IP network as it currently stands a viable option for monitoring centres? Or to put it another way, is it as reliable as the existing copper-based service?
For critical in-band alarm reporting, no. And in fact, by nature of its design, it cannot be.
So with PSTN, Simon, basically, if I send an alarm across that network using inbound, right, using the 1345 service, the telco will give you a 99.999% guarantee that that call will terminate it to its destination. To make that same call across NBN, has anybody given any type of SLA?
No, there are no SLAs. And that was the discussion I had earlier in the day, where they're saying that until NBN code delivers this commercial grade service, there are no SLAs.
Yeah, well, that's your question with regards to reliability of delivering alarms, right? Because that's the ultimate. When a telco gives you an SLA, a guarantee or a percentage guarantee that that event will terminate to its destination, until that time, it's an unreliable service.
Right.
And at the moment, I think the NBN is being delivered over a contended link. So that one link is being shared by multiple people, whether it's residential or whether it's shared among other businesses, that link is being shared. So the NBN can't guarantee bandwidth to that security control room to deliver these events across, and that seems to be a major issue.
What I'm gathering so far in this discussion is that the NBN in its current format is not going to effectively replace the legacy copper network in terms of reliable alarm delivery. And yet this vital piece of information is not being communicated to the monitoring centres like I've searched for, but haven't been able to find any articles or any announcements that highlights this point.
Yeah, it's a specialized market. We're such a small piece of this huge market and all these different sectors with different needs. And I think it certainly hasn't had the attention that it's warranted. They're rolling out, they're forcing people to migrate to this technology that can't do what they need it to do. And it's not like we're talking about answering a phone call or making a phone call where it doesn't matter necessarily if it drops out, because you can just redial that number and continue with your conversation. We're talking about M2M devices with basically zero tolerance.
You were saying before the podcast, Mark, that there is an adjunct solution that is being recommended by some suppliers. Can you quickly recap what that solution is?
The shape of that solution at the moment is to connect a digital to analog conversion device on the back of that NBN connection and then connect the alarm receiving equipment to that solution. And certainly our experience in almost 100% of cases where we've seen that has not performed as expected. And it's only at that stage, once the customer in conjunction with their telco have realised that, well, look, this isn't going to be satisfactory moving forward, we'll have to provide an alternate solution. And it's usually, once that point of realisation has been made, it can take considerable time to fix it, to bring in an alternative service, to provide the alternative to NBN infrastructure.
And in the meantime, the control room's having to deal with customers and bureaus
suffering on a daily basis. Yeah, I mean, and that sort of... it's not a complete interruption to service. The problem is that it works some of the time for some of the customers. Absolute worst case scenario is that call does not transit through and that opportunity is missed and a life is lost or infrastructure is damaged or burnt down or, there's something really critical. Of course, the impact of that could mean, quite apart from the legal liability ramifications, there's a very real possibility that will have a dramatic impact on life and limb and cost to infrastructure. So yes, that would have a direct impact on the business, but an abstract impact we're seeing at the moment is that a control panel, an alarm system in the field makes a call through the existing network, hits the central station, and for a number of reasons that call does not succeed. So the panel then falls back and it dials again. And in that case may still not succeed, and then falls back and dials again for however many times the panel's been programmed to do so. It may or may not get through. In some cases, it may succeed ultimately after several attempts. The net result of that for that customer is that his monthly telephone or quarterly telephone bill comes in, and instead of being the usual $30 a month worth of 1345 calls, it becomes $300 or $600 or $1,000 or $3,000 phone bills.
Wow, so the calls are actually terminating then?
Correct. They can terminate and not complete because they're not being handshaken by the receiver. So the panel then says, oh, didn't get a handshake, I'll hang up and I'll dial again and again and again until I succeed. So we definitely have had first-hand experience with that, and the central stations are dealing with it where they get a very upset customer on the phone or an email. Hey, I've just checked my phone bill. It's $1,100 where it's normally $67.
Incredible.
What's going on with this? What are you going to do about it? So yeah, and at that stage, we're 3 months down the track, for instance, in that case, and even if the monitoring centre were to provide a solution to that problem they've said, look, we need to fix that. Let's talk to the telco. Let's talk to whoever we need to fix this to get that done properly. It still might take 3 to 6 months for that infrastructure to be put into place to fix it.
Or the Band-Aid would be to put in a wireless IP communicator, but that's a Band-Aid to the whole problem.
We'll multiply that by 3,000 customers,
it'll fix
potentially.
That one client, but not the actual problem.
So at the moment, the monitoring centres that are in this position, as Luke was suggesting, they may have 1 or 2 customers are the ones that have put their hand up and they're very upset about hopefully just a billing issue and not a situation where, my mother pressed the panic button, she fell down in the shower, broke her hip, and laid there for 2 days because that signal didn't go through. I mean, they're the two ends of the spectrum as far as the impact. All of them business killers.
These calls are getting to the alarm receiver. If we take this individual client now making all these extra calls to get that one call through, times that by 3,000, all of a sudden the control room's infrastructure is being inundated.
Potentially, yeah. But that by nature would cause congestion.
Yeah.
Congestion into the receivers, yeah.
To sum it up, how would you encapsulate the cause of the issues related to the NBN network? Like, what is the fundamental cause in your opinion? Why isn't it as reliable as the legacy copper network?
The issues that we're seeing to a great degree, the technical issues with that solution are based on contention, as Luke mentioned earlier on. So that the more traffic that is being sent through the network, the more failures that occur in those transmissions, the more calls that get placed, and therefore the
snowball
more
effect.
The whole thing is snowballs.
And this could not even necessarily be dependent solely on your link. It could be someone else
in the area. Yeah, absolutely.
If it's a contended link and other people are sharing, I guess, that bandwidth,
streaming movies.
If someone else is like using a lot of data, that will potentially affect the control room's ability to terminate alarm events.
And they have absolutely zero control over that. Even if you don't run into a data congestion issue in your area, you're wholly and solely dependent on the backhaul connection between that ISP and NBN. It's the size of their backhaul connection into the NBN network that directly affects. So they may have a national connection from their data networks into NBN. It depends on the size of their pipe and the amount of traffic that's being sent over that pipe by their customers that affects you. It's a very complex subject. There's not a simple solution to that. Just because you pick a large telco doesn't necessarily mean you get the best performance from that service as such. In the end, it's unpredictable and it's very circumstantial based on demand and load and time of day and all of those other factors, which in the security industry, we don't have the luxury of being able to say, well, look, I won't download my movies until 3 a.m. because things will be quieter then and the connection will be faster. We're in a situation where at any second, any minute of the day, we may need 100% performance. And that just simply can't be delivered on NBN today.
To deliver alarm events into control rooms, we need dedicated or committed bandwidth in order to control that environment. But we're unable to control this environment on NBN. And delivering alarm events is next level to standard VoIP services.
So for monitoring centres that are looking down the barrel of having their PSTN services switched off thanks to the NBN rollout, as you've pointed out, the NBN network in its current state is not a viable option for alarm delivery. What are the alternatives available or options available for monitoring centres?
The unfortunate circumstance is that no two sites, no two businesses operate in the same manner. So there's not a universal solution where you could say, okay, understand that this NBN service that is about to be delivered to you or is scheduled to be delivered to you is probably not going to be able to address all the problems that you're going to encounter. So you need an alternative. But that alternative will vary depending upon where that business is located relative to infrastructure in the metropolitan area, wherever you're operating, and also the sorts of varieties of services that the telco that you contact can actually deliver.
But is there a specific technology that you are recommending as an alternative to the majority of monitoring centres? Because if they've received the notification letter from NBN Co., then they obviously need to start looking at alternative solutions.
Exactly right. ISDN is one example of proven existing technology, been in service for decades. Obviously not necessarily the way for the distant future. We're in this interim period for a small percentage of the consumer group, being the security monitoring industry, where there really isn't a viable IP alternative, certainly not over the NBN. And that's not to blame NBN Co for that at all, but the services that are available to our businesses today are certainly not suitable, and we need to be looking at alternatives. As discussed, ISDN is one of those.
Yeah, and ISDN is proven to work as well. And a lot of the large control rooms use ISDN rather than PSDNs anyway, right? So
yeah, purely based on the number of incoming lines they have, it made commercial sense to be on an ISDN, on a digital solution, digital, not IP. And that's a subtle difference to some people. They hear digital or they hear analog, they hear PSDN or they hear IP, and the differences aren't apparent in conversation. But when you drive down to the day-to-day operation, there are huge differences.
Well, we use it here for our own IntelliPath. We have ISDN over fiber. We've got many connections in here, so we have first-hand experience with ISDN.
I mean, ultimately, we've had discussions at a high level with the telcos directly. Their game plan is not to maintain ISDN indefinitely for the next 20 or 30 years, but until these guys can deliver a viable alternative.
Yeah, we can't work off promises today. By saying IP is the future is not good enough for our industry, and we need to be able to recommend a solution that's proven and that works. There is no out-of-the-box solution. You can't just contact your telco and say, hey, I need a solution to terminate my alarm events on. It doesn't exist today. So if you get the letter from NBN, don't feel NBN is your only option. At the moment, the proven solution is ISDN.
And is that the appropriate solution for everyone? Probably not.
Probably not. No. And it's going to depend on how many lines they have, their location, their budget. It's all these things. There's so many things to consider that need to be addressed sooner rather than later, because if you address it too late, it can really impact your business and ability to monitor events.
You were saying before we started recording the podcast that quite a large number of monitoring centres are now contacting Suretek for assistance. So obviously word's gotten out that you guys have options that you can help people with. What sort of information do you need from the monitoring centres so that you can steer them in the right direction?
I'd suggest, first of all, be interesting, obviously useful to know, have they received the notification? And if so, when was that received? Has it just been received, or was it a year ago? And what are the cut-off dates that were given in that notification, so we know the time frame that we're dealing with? It would also be useful to know the number of incoming existing copper services that they have now. Just opening up that line of dialogue and at least initially letting us know what are the cut-off dates that you've been notified, and of course where they are. That would allow us to make some inquiries about the services that are available for that area.
But to provide best recommendations to these guys, like what Mark said, we really do need to know how many incoming lines they have, like how many current PSDNs they have. For example, ISDN services come in lines of 10, 20 or 30, right? And so there's going to be a different charge for each of those links. And we also need to know their actual physical address as well, because that will impact on the ability to deliver whichever service is recommended for that site, which is an important factor for cost ongoing, right? So obviously the further away they are from the metro area, the more expensive potentially these links into the control rooms are going to be. So I think the important message is that when these guys get this letter is to start planning straight away. The best option I think at this point is to contact Mark and begin that consultation from the get-go rather than waiting, because there's no running from the NBN. Like, it's coming, and if they say they're going to terminate those copper lines or the PSDN lines at your building on a certain date, they will do it. And we can't have this attitude that we're in security, so we have priority and they won't do this to us, because they're doing it.
And that's some good advice from Luke Kavanagh and Mark Hatton from Suretek. And if you have received a notification letter of the NBN rollout occurring in your area, then certainly get in contact with Mark Hatton. You can email Mark at mark.hatton, Hatton, at suretek.com.au. And if you provide Mark with your details, being your physical street address, the number of PSDN lines you have running into your monitoring centre, and also the cut-off date that NBN have provided you with, Mark can then give you the right advice and steer you in the right direction. If you have any general inquiries about any of the topics discussed in today's podcast, you can contact Suretek on 1300 65 4433.